Hi, welcome everyone to episode 10 of Club Ausome Live. Today is International Day of Persons with Disabilities. Well, that's what the UN call it. I'm not a fan of person first language, so I call it International Disabled Persons Day. I'm your host, Charlie Hart, also known as Ausome Charlie, with an AU for autistic. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by my lovely husband, Si. I've known Si for 15 years now. And
16 years.
Is it 16?
Been married for 14.
Yeah, your maths is better than mine. I still like him most of the time. When I met Si, I noticed that he spoke openly about his disabilities to anyone who was interested, and lots of people were. He was happy to answer questions about diabetes. If someone in the pub noticed him checking his blood sugars or taking insulin and asked him, he would talk very openly and candidly about it. I believe that Si was the first person I ever met who identified as disabled with no hint of shame, just in a totally matter-of-fact way. I often credit him as being my first disabled role model. I respected his candour years before I identified my own disabilities and years before I discovered disability advocacy and the neurodiversity movement. So I just want to start with my HR hat on here and give you the definition of disability. It's unique to the UK, this one. It's the Equality Act 2010, but similar definitions exist in other countries, particularly in the Western world anyway. But the Equality Act 2010, it defines disability as a physical or mental condition that has a substantial and long-term impact on a person's ability to do day-to-day activities. So one of the misconceptions I'd like to clear up is you can consider yourself to be disabled even if you do not have a formal diagnosis, even if your neurotype enables you in some ways, yes, even if you have superpowers. It can be swings and roundabouts, but our gifts do not cancel out our struggles, so we can still be disabled even if we're gifted. Neurodivergent people often have spiky profiles where they're particularly good at some things and particularly challenged by others. But they can still identify as disabled if they feel that they meet that definition. Acknowledging our strengths can be great for our self-esteem, but we can still do that and still consider ourselves disabled, and I do. It's Si, why do you identify as disabled? And what disabilities do you have that you don't mind sharing here?
Why do I identify as disabled? Because I am disabled.
Yeah.
I have type 1 diabetes, and the Equality Act requires the condition to be considered without treatment. And obviously, if I don't take insulin within a few days, I die. So
That's how to get rid of you.
So that's definitely a disability. I have mobility issues. I've got a fused ankle, so I've only got one floppy foot.
It's fixed at a 90-degree angle, Si's right foot. So when I met him, he didn't really talk a lot about that, but I noticed things like if we were walking up a hill, that he was walking on the balls of his feet, because you literally can't walk uphill with your feet flat if your ankle is fixed at 90 degrees.
And most recently, of course, my ADHD diagnosis.
Yeah. So ADHD is a lifelong condition, but we're born with it, we die with it, we don't grow out of it. But both of us only discovered that we were ADHD in our 40s. It's always been there. We just didn't know about it. And so you say you're disabled rather than you have disabilities. Is there a particular reason that you're happy to use the word disabled? Because I'm the same, but a lot of people don't get it.
I do use both. I certainly describe myself as somebody with disabilities, but the first thing that I was obviously aware of was the diabetes, and I've always been a diabetic. I've never had a problem with that, and I don't understand where the issue is, and why some people want it to be described as a person with diabetes, because I am a diabetic. It's just one of those.
It goes
One of those
without
things.
saying you're a person, I think, because diabetes doesn't exist on its own.
No.
Yeah. So it was very helpful to me to learn the phrase dynamic disabilities, because not only are my disabilities, which is autism, ADHD, and complex PTSD, not only are they spectrum conditions, which means they affect different people in different ways, but they fluctuate for me as well. So that's why they're dynamic disabilities. They're not the same magnitude every day. They do vary. For example, sometimes my resilience is shot to pieces by complex PTSD, and other times I'm highly resilient. It's not a constant. The hypervigilance that I get with complex PTSD, where I'm like meerkatting and perceiving danger everywhere, that isn't constant either. If I'm stressed or overwhelmed and I'm experiencing a wave of grief, then my autistic sensory sensitivities are more disabling to me than usual. When things go wrong, I feel much more disabled than I do when everything's going to plan. Does that strike a chord with you, Si?
Absolutely. Certainly with the ADHD, if I'm in a good flow state, if things are going nicely, it's a lot. You're tapping into your superpowers, as some people say. That life can be quite easy at that point, and other times that can be flipped on its head and really struggle. The diabetes, if I'm doing well, if I'm healthy, if the calculations are right and my blood sugars are stable, it's just one of those things you live with. But there are other times when, if I'm a bit under the weather, if I've got a virus, if other things have affected it, my diabetes can be, bouncing around all over the place. I can have high sugars, low sugars, and that again can vary on a day-to-day basis and be far more debilitating one day than it is the next.
Yeah, I've noticed that about diabetes. Not only it's not like a rigid formula because there are so many variables to take into account, like the amount of insulin that you need could vary with exercise, or if your body's going nuts trying to what do you call it? Trying to maintain homeostasis, so the natural body's state that it wants to be. If it's particularly hot or particularly cold, for instance, thermoregulation. That's the word I was looking for. I've noticed that they can send your sugars haywire.
Yeah.
And likewise, if you get an infection that might not particularly bother other people, it is going to hit you harder because you've got an autoimmune disease that's diabetes.
Yep.
So, yeah, it's definitely dynamic. So we touched on this before, but the thing about person first language versus identity first language, it's a bit of history here, going back to the politically correct 90s, I think it was, when a lot of people were told that they have to use person first language. And that includes medical professionals, it includes school teachers, all kinds. But they were told that you shouldn't define a person by their disabilities. So, for instance, if I applied that for Si, that means I wouldn't be able to call him diabetic. I wouldn't be able to use the adjective diabetic, but I would be able to say that he is a person with diabetes or that he has diabetes. So I think there's been a massive shift towards identity first language, but I've noticed that more with people who have become disabled or become aware they're disabled as adults. And using the adjectives, like saying I'm autistic, that's known as identity first language. It's part of my identity. The way that my brain is wired is autistic. It's who I am. It says more about me than other characteristics like my gender. So, but yeah, in the politically correct 90s, we couldn't talk about people like that. And I think it was the deaf community that first said, sod this, I'm not a person with a hearing impairment, I'm deaf. I'm deaf with a capital D, and I'm going to have a social justice movement to say we are equally valid members of society, and we need to be included, and we are not less than because of our disabilities. And the autistic community, the adult autistic community at least, agreed with them. So there's a lot of identity first language in the neurodiversity movement, and I'm a big fan. But language preferences have started to shift. But I do think it's really important that we respect an individual's language preference. So if someone said to me, I have autism, I'm not going to overrule that with my preference and say, no, you're not, you're autistic, because it's up to the individual at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I might say that I'm autistic. I might mention I have autism, but I would never, ever say I am a person with autism, because it's so clunky and unnecessary.
Some people just don't like labels, though. That's the. I'm just looking at the some of the comments that are coming up on the chat.
Yeah. Hi, Melanie. Hi, Emma.
There does seem to be, for some people, a stigma attached to having a label stuck on you. I think was it Ian Rose?
Ian's
commented about how lots of people not declaring their disabilities at work,
yes,
and are therefore missing out on potential regional adjustments that would make their life easier.
Yes. So on that, the subject of disclosing a disability at work, it's like a subsector of what I'm talking about here. So somebody could identify as disabled, they could self-advocate for their needs, but I wouldn't expect them to necessarily declare or disclose a disability at work unless they have psychological safety. So what that means is you feel safe, and you actually are safe to be open about your disabilities or long-term health conditions or anything else like that at work, without fear of things like discrimination, being passed over for promotion, even mockery, bullying, harassment. There's all kinds of things that can go wrong if the culture isn't right. So, but I'm mainly talking here about whether you identify as disabled or not. So you can identify as disabled but still not feel safe to declare it at work. It's kind of two different things. So, but I just don't get the person with disability, because it goes without saying that I'm a person. And then you've got flowery euphemisms for disability, like differently abled and handicapable. They give me the ick, because hiding the word disabled away, to me, that implies there's something bad or shameful.
It's making it a dirty word, isn't it?
Yeah. So that can only possibly add to the stigma, whereas lots of people being openly visible and proud disabled role models and saying, I'm disabled, I have this disability, that will over time reduce the stigma. And it's a lengthy process, it's baby steps. But I think it's quite damaging to introduce flowery euphemisms and hide behind those. What do you think? Do you agree?
Yep.
Yeah. And then there's medication. So I see many conflicting views about medication. Many disability advocates are destigmatizing medication as well, and I think that that's really important. So I take sertraline, 50 milligram of sertraline every day. That helps with my complex PTSD and my anxiety. It is an antidepressant, but I wasn't prescribed it for that. But if I was, there's no shame in that either. I take amitriptyline at night, which helps relax me and helps me sleep. And then that also helps with some physical symptoms that I get with my disabilities. Like a lot of autistic people have issues with gastrointestinal problems, like they quite often have irritable bowel syndrome, for instance. And some of the psychotropic medication can calm that down. I have just this week started taking ADHD medication. So I have a form of methylphenidate,
Mm-hmm.
which is long acting. So I take it when I wake up, wears off around 9 o'clock. It's working pretty well. It doesn't fix everything, but it isn't causing any negative side effects either. It's just helping me cope. It's helping me focus. So I'm a big fan of being open about our medication. I do stuff that's non-medication that helps my mental health as well, like going out for walks in the countryside. But I
think it depends on the medication as well, though. No one's ever said to me, "Oh, maybe you don't need that insulin."
Yeah.
You could. There are other things you can do to keep sugar levels in a stable position without insulin. That doesn't ever come into conversation. Whereas medications for ADHD, for anxiety, all that sort of stuff, there's again seems to be a bit of stigma attached to it, and people worry, and yes.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I have actually heard people say that with a healthy diet and exercise that you can prevent diabetes or even cure it. If they're right at all, they would have to be talking about adult onset diabetes, type 2, because with type 1 diabetes, and I didn't know this before I met Si, and that's why it's so important that we have these visible role models that talk. But I didn't realise that with type 1 you produce no insulin at all.
No.
So I had gestational diabetes in my second pregnancy, and I had to take insulin for that. And that puts me more at risk of adult onset diabetes. So I do try to watch my refined sugar intake and be a healthy weight and get enough exercise. But I know that it will probably hit me at some point, because it has with other members of my family. But there's no stopping type 1 diabetes, because there's a genetic predisposition, and then it can be brought on by trauma or all kinds of things, and people don't realise that either. But once you've got it, you have to take artificial insulin. There's no choice. But what about ADHD meds? Because some people demonise those as well. What do you think?
Well, personally, I think they've been wonderful. But yes, some people possibly have had the wrong ones, or just have a closed mind to the possibility that medications can help. But I personally think that, from my own personal experience, that medication has been wonderful.
Yeah,
and it has really changed my life.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I don't think they've fixed all of your ADHD related challenges, because your time distortion is still off the charts. So I had to go and grab Si and drag him up here at midday because he thought he had loads of time left. But then, likewise, I only scripted the questions about half an hour ago, so that's partly me as well, and we're both ADHD. But what I have noticed is that he finds it a lot easier to cope with the basically life. So that means that his well-being is better, and he's a happier person, and he's nicer to be around as well. So his ADHD medication has helped him. It's helped me. It's helped the kids. And I absolutely give it a big thumbs up. But it's not for everyone, and not everyone can take it. So Emma has asked about the effect of ADHD meds if you're autistic too. Well, I'm autistic too, and I'm quite early in my ADHD meds journey. I'm still only taking 10 milligrams a day. But I have talked to other ADHD people about it. That's a nice self-identity label that we sometimes use if we're autistic and ADHD. And the consensus is that it can amplify your autistic traits. So if you keep the ADHD traits under control somewhat with ADHD meds, you can sometimes find that you're more sensory sensitive and more reliant on planning and preparation and things like that. I don't think any of that's a bad thing. So I absolutely still take it, even though I'm autistic, and many other people do as well. There are some concerns between taking a combination of ADHD meds and SSRIs, which is sertraline. Yeah, you can get Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. They're a kind of antidepressant.
It's a serotonin overdose, basically, isn't it?
So it is possible that you can experience negative impacts if you take the wrong doses of ADHD meds and SSRIs, and that's why it's really important to listen to the guidance from your ADHD doctor. So a bit about disability pride. So I celebrate Disability Pride Month in July. I love it. It's straight after LGBT Pride Month in June. I love how they're together because to me there's so much overlap. I know so many disabled and neurodivergent people in the LGBT community and vice versa. So disabled pride to me, it's not saying we're better than other people. It's pride as in the refusal to feel ashamed about being disabled, the refusal to let other people shame us for disabled. And it's a time when I like to talk about how we disabled people are not less than. We are equally worthy humans, and we too deserve accessibility, inclusion, compassion, and respect. What do you think about it, Si? Do you experience disabled pride?
It's a new concept to me, so I'm looking forward to working with you on that next year. But
brilliant, yeah. And then we're running out of time, but a little bit about the difference between using disabled affirming or neuro affirming language versus pathological language. So a little bit of context here. There's different ways of looking at disability. So you can look through it through the lens of the social model of disability, which is basically saying there's nothing wrong with us, we're not the problem, but systems are not set up to accommodate us and be inclusive and accessible to us. So we're disabled by society. I think there is a lot of merit in that, but it's not the whole picture. So there's no way that disabilities like diabetes, which they really don't come with any advantages and absolutely need to be medicated.
Oh, no, free NHS prescriptions.
Yeah, that's the one advantage, yeah. So I've got so many meds now that I do the NHS prepayment certificate thing, so it's costing me about a tenner a month for all my meds. But an individual prescription now on the NHS, it's nearly £10, isn't it, just for one? And Si's had his his medical exemption and got free meds since his diabetes. So yeah, there's that one thing. But
that is the only advantage that I can see.
So there's the social model of disability, and there's also the medical model of disability, or the pathology model. So that suggests there's something wrong with us and that we need to be fixed. And actually, I think when you look at things like putting my HR hat back on, when you look at the definition of disability under the Equality Act, and the fact that some of us might like to request reasonable adjustments in the workplace, we might appreciate to be protected from employment discrimination and wrongful dismissal on disability grounds, although that still happens, and it happens too often with confidentiality clauses which hide the full extent of the picture. There's many advantages, like we can apply for access to work, all kinds of things. And without the medical model currently, there isn't really a way to do that. So we have to basically say, yes, we have impairments, and there's no way around it. But I think it's really important to use neuro-affirming language when speaking to neurodivergent people and not to pathologize them. So it can affect how we feel, and it can affect how others perceive us as well. And there's a lot of pathologizing language in our daughters. We have two daughters, or whatever gender they currently are, and their diagnostic reports for autism are riddled with pathological language to such an extent I didn't want them to read them. They both wanted to read them, and I had to say to them, please take this language with a pinch of salt. It's just so that we can get you the support that you need at school. But actually, there's nothing wrong with you. We think you're wonderful, and we don't want to change you. We don't want to change who you are. We don't think there's something wrong with your quirky communication style and things. So we love you and accept you for who you are. But yes, here, read this really pathologizing report. And I think they appreciate that. But they also appreciate the fact that we identify as neurodivergent and disabled as well. I'd recommend that any parents who have got neurodivergent kids get screened themselves, because that's really helpful for the kids too. It bothers me a little, and maybe this is just me, but if I see other adults who've got disabilities, and I know they've got disabilities because it's things that really impact their ability to cope with life, things like MS, for instance, or maybe they've got multiple neurodivergences and mental health conditions with it as well. And I feel like they need extra support and compassion, but they don't identify as disabled. It bugs me a lot because I feel like they've got internalized ableism. And if they feel like that about having that disabled identity for themselves, then it kind of makes me think that they might think that other disabled people like me are defective and less than. So it's just my take. But do you feel like that, or is it not something you've really thought about?
I have thought about it in so much as, I mean, things like my brother, who's also type 1 diabetic, used to work for a supermarket chain, didn't tell them, and used to just sneak off to the toilets to take his insulin and stuff.
Wow.
And, could have so easily had just a very reasonable adjustment made to allow him to deal with his diabetes. But he felt a stigma to it, and felt that his employer would not understand. So he kept it secret and just snuck around, stabbing himself discreetly in the toilets. And it's just,
wow,
it's wrong.
Yeah, I didn't realise that. It's shocking that there's still that fear that a literal physical disability where you have to take medication and you have to check your blood sugars to be well and stay alive, that there's this fear of being open about it. So there's a lot of work to do here still. And then low functioning and high functioning labels. So yes, there's a lot of people that might identify as disabled or neurodivergent, but then have to caveat it with, but I'm very high functioning. And that gives me the ick as well, because to me, it's not only denying their support needs, so you've got that internalized ableism again, but it's also trying to put some distance between them and others who might be more disabled or disabled with higher support needs. And it kind of smacks of Aspie supremacism. And that gives me the ick because, for a start, my brother is autistic and has learning disabilities. And I do not think that he's a less worthy human being. He deserves as much acceptance, respect, and compassion as I do with my genius IQ. So I'm never going to say I'm high functioning and he's low functioning. It's just all kinds of ick. But yeah, and if you say that you're low functioning, or you describe your child or your brother or whatever as low functioning, then that can deny them agency. So he should still be able to make his own decisions. He shouldn't have people talking over him and not giving him any agency in his own life. So, yeah, just functioning labels. Yeah.
An example of that would be when I had my motorcycle accident as a 20-year-old, and I was in a wheelchair. I remember going around the Harlequin Centre in Watford with my mother pushing me in this wheelchair, and people would stop and they'd talk to my mother about me rather than talking to me as a young adult. Because I was in a wheelchair, they talked to my mother as if I was a baby in a pram and unable to communicate for myself. And it was a real eye opener at the time, and a real shock.
Yeah. So.
And I found it quite demeaning.
Yeah, it would be. So they assume that because you're in a wheelchair with mobility issues that you can't speak for yourself. And that's why we need to carry on doing this work.
Mm.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have run out of time. So I'd like to thank you, Si, for sharing your lived experience and perspectives. I'd like to thank whoever is watching for joining us in the conversation, which I hope was insightful. I'd like to thank Melanie and Emma and who else was it? Ian, for joining us in the chat. Your points are very excellent, and sorry I didn't call them all out, but we were a bit pushed for time. Yeah, probably. Yeah, I think I can look through them later. Yeah, please do connect with each other. Please connect with me if you're not already. I'm under Ausome Charlie on most social media. Please connect with Si. He's Si Hart on LinkedIn. Consider booking him or us together to speak about our lived experience of disability at your events, or specifically about ADHD, about autism, recovering from serious motorcycle accidents, about type 1 diabetes. Si can be booked through the contact page on my website, www.ausomecharlie.co.uk. See you next time. And remember, disabled